Greetings all, welcome to my video. From CollectiveEvolution.com. Stargate files shed light on some astonishing secrets the government never told us about Mars. By Arjun Walia. The picture of a small region of Mars above is from the European Space Agency. What is the Stargate project? Well, it was a joint effort by the CIA and NSA, along with SRI and a few other academic institutions around the world to study parapsychology, telepathy, ESP, remote viewing, etc. The program lasted more than 2 decades, and was funded by millions of dollars. You would think that a black budget, special access program, that ran for more than 2 decades had some success, and it did. The Stargate program was used in multiple missions for national security and intelligence collection purposes, and the United States wasn't the only country interested in this type of phenomena. For example, here is a document going into detail about certain people, studies by the Department of Defense, with paranormal abilities. Linked below is a cancelled TED Talk by Russell Targ, a physicist and co-founder of the Stargate program, sharing everything he knows about ESP. Here is another example from Russia, of a woman who was in the hands of their military for a while. Also linked below is a great declassified U.S. Air Force report on teleportation, which was made available through the Federation of American Scientists, which also mentions human beings who possess certain abilities. A CIA document titled Chronology of Recent Interest in Exceptional Functions of the Human Body in the People's Republic of China is another great example of their interest. In the document, it outlines the Chinese government's interest in parapsychology, remote viewing, telepathy, psychokinesis, etc., just as the ones above do. In 1976, a presentation was given at the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, on a paper published by the Institute, on behalf of Hal Puthoff, now part of the To the Stars initiative, who received and released the recent UFO Pentagon footage from the US government, and Russell Targ. Both of them titled the paper, A Perceptual Channel for Information Transfer, Over Kilometer Distances, Historical Perspectives, and Recent Research. Remote viewing, which was a large part of the program, had an 85% success rate, and it could be taught to other people as well. Remote viewing is the ability to describe a remote geographical location, in detail, from a distant location. It's as if these people were trained, and had the ability to project their consciousness into other areas, in which they were not physically located, or at least, somehow, perceive those areas. Remote viewing also seemed to show that time, as we know it, isn't what we think it is, as it was also used to peer into the past, as well as into the future, with successful hits. The dialogue below about Mars is an example of that. Paul H. Smith, Ph.D., one of the participants in the Stargate project, now a retired U.S. Army major, gives us details from his book, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. He also describes in his book how remote viewing, in multiple occasions, was successfully used to predict future events, and shares his own successful experience of successfully perceiving future events, with great accuracy. One of the participants in the program, Ingo Swann, was able to successfully describe and view a ring around Jupiter, which scientists had no idea even existed. This took place precisely before NASA's Pioneer 10 spacecraft flyby of the planet. To summarize, over the years, the back-and-forth criticism of protocols, refinement of methods, and successful replication of this type of remote viewing in independent laboratories has yielded considerable scientific evidence for the reality of the phenomenon. Adding to the strength of these results, was the discovery that a growing number of individuals could be found to demonstrate high-quality remote viewing, often to their own surprise. The development of this capability at SRI has evolved to the point where visiting CIA personnel, with no previous exposure to such concepts, have performed well under controlled laboratory conditions. The point is, remote viewing and other similar phenomena is real, and can no longer be debunked. It's been validated a number of times. In 1999, statistics professor Jessica Utz, at UC Irvine, published a paper, showing that parapsychological experiments have produced much stronger results than those showing a daily dose of aspirin, helping to prevent heart attacks. UTS also showed that these results are much stronger than the research behind various drugs like antiplatelets, for example. Even as far back as 1985, a report prepared by the Army Research Institute disclosed that the data reviewed in this report constitute genuine scientific anomalies, for which no one has an adequate explanation for. Just because it can't be explained, does not mean it's not real. The statistical results of the studies examined are far beyond what is expected by chance. Arguments that these results could be due to methodological flaws in the experiments are soundly refuted. Effects of similar magnitude to those found in government-sponsored research at SRI and SAIC have been replicated at a number of laboratories across the world. Such consistency cannot be readily explained by claims of flaws or fraud. So, what about Mars? It's safe to assume that not all which was discovered was declassified. Personally, I believe that declassifying a controversial topic is possibly a tool used by the intelligence community to prolong secrecy. I could be wrong, but it seems that when something is declassified, like the Stargate program, the general population automatically assumes that that's all there was to it, and there is nothing new left to discover. I don't believe that's true, and it might be a way to stop public inquiry into controversial and secretive subjects. That being said, we recently came across some interesting documents regarding Mars via the Stargate files. As mentioned above, remote viewing was not limited to distance. The viewer could be trying to determine what's in the next room, or the contents of an envelope they were given, or they could be tasked to remote view not only another country's defense installations, but planets like Jupiter, as mentioned above, the Moon, and now we know that the same thing happened on Mars. The CIA was using a remote viewer to look at the planet Mars, not as it is presently, but to peer into the past. Below is an example of how one of these remote viewing sessions went. What's interesting about the dialogue below is that the viewer mentions a great climate shift. Fast forward to today, and it wasn't that long ago when NASA scientists gathered for a press conference letting the world know that, millions of years ago, they really didn't know when, but just had a general approximation, there was a massive climate change that took place on Mars. Although they claim they do not know what caused this dramatic shift in climate, they know that prior to it, Mars was very much an Earth-like planet, with vast oceans, mountains, lots of vegetation, and most likely life. In the conference, they also expressed the high probability that life on Mars still exists today, although if it does it's probably microbial, and located within the interior. What else did the viewer see? He saw signs of life. Now keep in mind that this is before the big climate change, and it's interesting because he describes them as tall thin humanoids, wearing some sort of suit. The defense employee is constantly asking the viewer to shift coordinates. After this, if you continue to read the document, the viewer describes large pyramid structures, and much more. All of this is very interesting, especially when you consider that the remote viewing program had such a high success rate. What's so significant about the document above is that there is corroborating information. As you saw, the remote viewer in this case was tasked with remote viewing Mars, but, again, did so in a time period approximately 1 million years BC. It's interesting to note how the remote viewer was brought back. Corroborating information. It wasn't long ago when renowned scientist Dr. John Brandenburg, who worked for the government, with top-secret security clearances, on various projects, shared some very sensitive information. He has worked on the rocket plume regolith interactions, on the Moon and Mars, vortex theory of rocket engine design, and the combined Sakharov-Kaluza-Klein theory of field unification, for purposes of space propulsion, and Mars science. Brandenburg was also the deputy manager of the Clementine mission to the Moon, which was part of a joint space project between the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization and NASA. The mission discovered water at the Moon's poles in 1994. Clearly, He knows his stuff. There are hundreds of similar types of people with impressive and verifiable backgrounds, relaying some very interesting information to the public. He stated that the Clementine mission to the moon was actually a photo reconnaissance mission, to check out strange structures on the backside of the moon, that were built by somebody else, not our civilization. He did so in the documentary, Aliens on the Moon. Brandenburg has also done extensive research on Mars, having found strong evidence of a past civilization, existing millions of years ago before the massive climatic shift. According to him, there was a large nuclear blast that could have caused the climate shift on Mars, and prior to this blast, Mars had a Bronze-aged civilization, with pyramids, and other giant structures, like the face on Mars, an Aztec-looking like head. There are a number of respected scientists in the field, who have been trying to tell people, that the face on Mars is not just some geological coincidence, but an actual face. The latest example of research to contemplate this, comes from a fairly new study, that was published in the Journal of Space Exploration, titled The Mountains of Cydonia, Elegant Geology, or Tetrahedral Geometry, and Reactions of Pythagoras and Dirac. A study that's added to the already robust evidence pointing to artificial surface interventions on Mars, as the study states. General Albert Stubblebine, a retired United States Major General, was the commanding general of the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, and one of America's most distinguished soldiers. He was also Chief of U.S. Army Intelligence, with 16,000 soldiers under his command. He was a major proponent of psychic warfare, and a key player in the Stargate project. Here's what General Stubblebine had to say about Mars. There are structures on the surface of Mars. I will tell you for the record, that there are structures underneath the surface of Mars, that cannot be seen by the Voyager cameras that went by in 1976. I will also tell you, that there are machines on the surface of Mars, and there are machines under the surface of Mars, that you can look at, you can find out in detail, you can see what they are, where they are, who they are, and a lot of detail about them. Dolan, Richard. UFOs and the National Security State, New York, Richard Dolan Press. Below is a lecture from the remote viewer mentioned in the CIA documents above. His name is Joe McMoneagle, and in the lecture he goes into detail about the session. Collective Evolution sat down with one of the authors of that study, Ananda Sirisena, who, along with his colleagues, recently published a paper in the Journal of Space Exploration, by him and his co-authors, and it explores certain features on the far side of the Moon, that appear in the crater Paracelsus C, titled Image Analysis of Unusual Structures, on the far side of the Moon. In the crater Paracelsus C, it argues that these features might be artificial in origin, meaning someone other than a human being built them and put them there. Ex-NASA scientists share concealed information about the face and pyramid found on Mars. In 1976, the United States sent a pair of space probes, known as Viking 1 and Viking 2, to Mars. Viking 1 was launched on August 20, 1975, and Viking 2 was launched in September of the same year. Both probes photographed the surface of Mars from orbit, and one studied the planet from the surface. The first one touched down on the surface of Mars on July 20, 1976, and the second a couple of months later. The main objectives of the mission were to obtain high-resolution images of Mars, to look for any evidence of life, and to learn more about the structure and composition of the atmosphere. As Viking 1 spacecraft was circling the planet, it spotted the shadowy likeness of a human face. An enormous head nearly 2 miles, from end to end, seemed to be staring back at the cameras, from a region of the red planet called Cydonia. A pyramid structure was also seen. This will be the main topic of this article. As a quick side note here, for years we've been made to believe that Mars is a dry and arid planet, completely devoid of life, but that's just not the case. Mars actually used to be an Earth-like planet, with giant oceans, and extensive greenery. The soil is moist and wet, and there is a very high likelihood that some type of life exists within the interior of Mars today. The question to ask here is, did NASA know this information from the Viking data in 1976? According to multiple insiders, who have worked for the agency, NASA is not always honest, and we are only being told this now, because they believe we are ready to process and accept these facts. For example, Bob Dean, a retired United States Army Command Sergeant Major, who also served at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, of NATO as an intelligence analyst, gave a lecture on footage and photos that had been erased and kept hidden for decades. Ladies and gentlemen, my government, NASA, which many of us in the United States say stands for, never a straight answer, proceeded to erase 40 rolls of film of the Apollo program, the flight to the moon, the flight around the moon, the landings on the moon, the walking guys here and there. They erased, for Christ's sake, 40 rolls of film of those events. Now we're talking about several thousand individual frames that were taken, that the so-called authorities determined that you did not have a right to see. Oh, they were disruptive, socially unacceptable, politically unacceptable. I've become furious. I'm a retired command sergeant major. I was never famous for having a lot of patience. He is one of multiple people accusing NASA of doing this. The giant face and pyramid on Mars. Here, you'll see the original picture taken by Viking which, as you can imagine, created quite the buzz when the world got to see it. To the left, you can see a close-up of the face, as well as a pyramid in close proximity, taken by Viking. To the right, you will see the original picture taken by NASA, straight from their website in 1976. Above the picture to your left and right you will see 3 different images which, according to NASA, are clearer versions of the pictures taken with improved instruments. In their original caption of the picture, NASA described it as a huge rock formation, which resembles a human head, formed by shadows giving the illusion of eyes, nose, and mouth. The authors reasoned it would be a good way to engage the public and attract attention to Mars. Well, according to multiple insiders with extensive backgrounds, this is not the case, and NASA lied about the images and data they collected, as well as fudged data and images. Based on these testimonies, among others, the photos released in 1998 and 2001, were meant to debunk rumors and put the issue to rest. The scientists. Dr. John Brandenburg. The picture above, which includes the pyramid, was taken from a lecture given by Dr. John Brandenburg, at the 26:46 mark. Any scientist who publicly shares information that challenges commonly held belief systems, as well as what's been put out by mainstream media, will always come under public scrutiny and ridicule. But when you have worked on space plasma technologies, nuclear fusion, and advanced space propulsion, and invented the microwave electrothermal plasma thruster, using water propellant for space propulsion, you deserve to be taken seriously. This is the case with Dr. John Brandenburg. He has also worked for the government, with top-secret security clearances on various projects. He worked on the rocket plume regolith interactions, on the Moon and Mars, vortex theory of rocket engine design, and the combined Sakharov-Kaluza-Klein theory of field unification, for purposes of space propulsion and Mars science. Brandenburg was also the deputy manager of the Clementine mission to the Moon, which was part of a joint space project between the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization, BMDO, and NASA. The mission discovered water at the Moon's poles in 1994. He currently works as a consultant to Morningstar Applied Physics. Here is one of his latest research endeavors. Brandenburg also works as a part-time instructor of astronomy, physics, and mathematics at Madison College, and other learning institutions in Madison, Wisconsin. Here's what he had to say. Someone complained to me, John, why do you have to bring Cydonia into this? And I said, because I can read a map. Here's what's at Cydonia Mensa. There's the face on Mars, there's the D&M pyramid, here it is in a second shot. This was taken July 25th, this was taken 30 days later. The government was apparently doing a follow-up investigation. These two pictures tell you everything you need to know about what's at Cydonia Mensa. If you see on a planet that used to be Earth-like, a carved human face, and a pyramid within 5 kilometers of each other, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what this all means. You can connect the dots. I mean sometimes, and I can tell you as a scientist, and I've seen other scientists do this, if you're cornered, you're just brazing it out, you hold up a picture of a buffalo, and insist that it's a dog. Dr. Brian O'Leary. Dr. Brian O'Leary was a NASA astronaut, and a member of the 6th group of astronauts selected by NASA in 1967. After this, he was recruited by Carl Sagan to teach at Cornell University, in the late 1960s, where he researched and lectured in the Department of Astronomy and Physics. After Cornell, he taught physics, astronomy, and science policy assessment at various academic institutions, including the University of California, Berkeley, Hampshire College, and finishing off at Princeton University from 1976 to 1981. After that, he went on to Washington, where he would become an advisor to various political leaders, presidential candidates, and the United States Congress. O'Leary was also a member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, as well as secretary of the American Geophysical Union's Planetology section. Furthermore, he was the team leader of the Asteroidal Resources Group for NASA's Ames Summer Study on Space Settlements. He was a founding board member of the International Association for New Science, as well as founding president of the New Energy Movement. O'Leary was always skeptical about Mars, and there are several others within these circles who were as well. I will be focusing on 3. He had some interesting things to say during a live interview. O'Leary and Carl Sagan were close for a number of years, but had a falling out when O'Leary decided to leave Cornell. In the interview, O'Leary remarked, "It was one very cold, snowy day in May. I landed in Syracuse, and there was a horizontal blizzard in May, and I said, that's it for upstate New York." And Carl thought that was very frivolous. Because, of course, he was kind of an empire builder kind of guy, and he also had a huge ego. After he left, O'Leary started to examine some of Carl's work. He said that the famous face in Cydonia on Mars, photographed by Viking in 1975, this enormous formation, about a mile across, resembled a human face, and created a major buzz at the time, was tampered with by Sagan, before being released to the public. It was very disappointing to me, because not only was Carl wrong, he also fudged data. He published a picture of the face in Parade magazine, a popular article, saying that the face was just a natural formation, but he doctored the picture to make it not look like a face. At this time, Sagan and O'Leary were arguably the world's 2 leading experts on Mars, and they entered into many disagreements over that face. This rift was made clear in O'Leary's publication in 1998, Carl Sagan and I, on Opposite Sides of Mars. It can be found in the case for the face. Scientists examine the evidence for alien artifacts on Mars. Editors Stanley V. McDaniel and Monica Ricks Paxson. Kempton, Illinois, Adventures Unlimited Press. In May of 1990, O'Leary released a paper titled Analysis of Images of the Face on Mars, and Possible Intelligent Origin, which only further demonstrated his skepticism. It was published in the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society, Volume 43 No. 5. O'Leary also went on the record and stated, "I began to realize, just directly from the scientific point of view, not only hearsay, that this man, Sagan, was colluding with NASA, that there might be more to this than before." Carl was on a committee with a number of notable people. There was a report issued by the Brookings Institution in 1961, and that's about when I knew Carl. During those years, the 60s, mostly was when I worked closely with him, that he and this other group said, well, if any ETs ever showed up on the Earth, it has to be covered up. That's the only way we're going to be able to manage this, because if we can't, then it would be too much of a public panic. Quite a shocking statement from someone of Brian's stature, isn't it? In the interview, he goes on to say that Carl and his colleagues recommended that the governments cover up the UFO phenomenon, and that he believes this provided justification for the ongoing cover-up. When it comes to Mars, as mentioned earlier in the article, Sagan was a big debunker of the face, publishing multiple works, stating that it was not a face, there were no pyramids, and that these are all the stuff of conspiracy theories. What's interesting here is that, not only does O'Leary mention Sagan, and his relationship with him, but so does Dr. John Brandenburg. In the lecture he gave, cited earlier in the article, Brandenburg also mentions that he was in contact with Sagan, that he sent Sagan the images of Mars, with an analysis of the face, and pyramids, and that it was clear that, that's what they were. The response from Sagan to Brandenburg was, "I never received them." Dr. Norman Bergrun. A mechanical engineer, Dr. Bergrun has worked at NASA for over a decade, and for Ames Research Laboratory, NACA, National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, also Lockheed Missiles and Space Company, now known as Lockheed Martin. He then went on to found Bergrun Engineering and Research. Obviously, he is another qualified individual with an impressive background. What does this tell us and why is it important? We live in an age where more and more people are waking up to the secrecy that plagues our planet. 10 years ago, if you were to mention that we are being watched through various high-tech means, it would have been unbelievable, but thanks to people like Edward Snowden, we know this to be true. It's unfortunate to realize that so many facts about our world are kept hidden from us, supposedly for the sake of national security, but it's quite evident that there are also special interests at stake, and secrecy is used to preserve and uphold these interests, whatever they may be. Today we have many whistleblowers, with verified credentials, from various agencies and branches of government, who are spilling the beans on several different topics, as well as other evidence to corroborate and back up what they say. Our website is full of examples, the ones presented in this article represent just a select few. While witness testimony is not always deemed credible, when you have up to, arguably, more than 1,000 qualified people coming forward, it becomes difficult to ignore. It's important to keep an open mind, because information will keep emerging, that threatens the belief systems of many. Too often, we completely shut down any chance of even entertaining this type of information, and that's done out of fear. When we've been shielded from the truth for so long, it can indeed be scary, and sometimes downright unbelievable, to wake up to the truth. Secrecy is a great way for the establishment to keep us in line, and prevent the human race from growing, expanding, and exploring, but our consciousness is shifting. We are becoming more aware, more curious, and more passionate about creating a better human experience for the entire race. We are constantly distracted with our own lives, trying to put food on the table, and make it through another work week, having our minds, thoughts, and wants programmed into our brains through mass marketing, but many people are no longer resonating with this type of human experience. It's time to start asking the bigger questions. It's time for the human race to leave its infancy and grow into adulthood, and transparency is the first step. Proper progress cannot be made if a civilization tries to move forward blindly, unconscious of the true nature of reality. Thank you for watching. Please help spread the word and make a difference by sharing and subscribing for more thought-provoking content, and give us a thumbs up if you liked the video. Your support is greatly appreciated. Be aware, and stay safe.